All right, let's get the show on the road. So this is UTA using TLS and applications for IETF 00 in Singapore. So if you're not interested in TLS or using it, then read the email or whatever. So for those of you who are here and plan to contribute to this working group, note the IETF note-well statement as it pertains to IPR rules for the IETF. I will note that we actually do have IPR statements in our working group. So this is sort of for real. All right. Our agenda today is reasonably light. Most of our core work in the working group, which got started some years ago to specify best practices for TLS, got done a while ago. We even have errata on our core documents. We are now in our sort of taking care of email phase, and even that seems to be sort of nearing completion. We'll get a couple of status updates from to our draft author teams today. I will note that the deep draft is in the ISD process. It's gone through several rounds of comments in the ISG queue. There are some editorial updates there, but nothing major. I expect to see that go through in the near future. So with that, we're going to have two presentations today. Oh, and before we get started with that, you'll note that I'm up here by my lonesome, and that is because our other co-chair decided for various reasons that she could no longer spend the time on IETF and had to sort of step down from all of her IETF activities. And that's why Orit is no longer helping me chair this. I think that our esteemed area director is working hard to get me a co-chair, and I think we'll have that soon. Which may even be in the works. Anyway, so with that, bear with me as I fumble all of the controls. Let's see if I can get the right version of the UTA MTA STS draft up. We can absolutely talk about deep if you like to. The authors, I note that the authors aren't here, but we have open mic time if there are unresolved issues that you feel we can cover. But we can perhaps do that during open mic. All right. Let me see. There we go. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Oh, Mike. Hello. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Nicholas Zborski, working at Google in Gmail. I'm going to give you updates on MTA, STS, as well as TLS RPT.
Oh, hang on. Hit it with the cursor.
All right. So the current status of the two drafts. We originally had everything in one. We split in two. We are at version 11 right now, shortly before the IETF, with only minor changes since. So the current state of the effort around that standard is we have multiple large ISP that already have a policy up. So we have Google, Comcast, Yahoo, and One-on-One Internet that have a policy set for their users' domain, and Microsoft is working on it. So to go over STS in 60 seconds fairly quickly, it depends on having a text record that indicates an ID that is used for cache invalidation, as well as an HTTPS endpoint that contains the policy. And the semantic are we are requiring HTTPS third validation, The model is similar to HSTS, and we support 3 modes. One is none to disable the policy, one reporting, which is basically just a dry run mode, where we don't enforce the policy, and finally enforce the policy. So quick summary of the work. The location of the policy is as shown on the screen, HTTPS mtsts.domain.com/.wellknown/mta-sts.txt. The policy format now is with key value pair. It used to be JSON. The DNS policy ID must uniquely identify a given policy, and it's used basically for cache invalidation. So if the ID change, we know that we need to refresh a policy. The MTS must support TLS 1.2 or later. SMTP client and HTTP server must support TLS SNI for both connection fetching policy as well as connections to the servers, SMTP server. The FCNI extension of HTTPS must have the name of the policy host. And the SNI extension of SMTP server must contain the MX host name. We updated the operational consideration with detailing how we do policy update. Like we update HTTP policy before the text record. And policy delegation is done using CNAME. And finally, how to do policy removal. And finally, we clarify like DOS attack mitigation associated with this. Now, the TLS RPT in 30 seconds. TLS RPT is meant to actually get a report on the TLS failure, on the connection failure, being based on a STS or DANE. So it relies on a text record that basically indicates where to send the report to in case of connection failure. It can be by HTTP post or over SMTP. And the report contains multiple fields, giving like aggregate stats as well as more detail for errors happening for TLS. So a quick summary, we have text resource record for SMTP-TLS RPT. We support both MTSS and DANE. We require DKIM signature, and the DKIM signature should not have a linked attribute. The reports are encoded in IJSON format. We added generic errors, allowing for known as like validation failure with some failure reason code. So people can, in the future, add additional reasons for failures. We clarify the report media type, the subject of the email, and file name recommendation. And as well as requiring the gzip compression for reports. Finally, we try delivery for 24 hours. So the close issue most recently has been we clarify 302 redirect and cache control. This subject been coming again and again, and it's clearly explained on mailing list. We had the finalization of this question. The policy to SAN matching versus policy to host name matching. Policy to SAN matching is actually needed by DANE. So that's why we settle on that. And finally, the TLS 1.2 requirement, 1.2 or later requirement. All right, so is there any open issues or feedback?
Jim, I'll just make a sort of this process note that we have actually passed working group last call on these documents, right? And the comments that we're sort of processing and that you guys processed in the last set of revisions were actually working group last call comments.
So this is Jim Fenton, and of course I sent in a lot of comments about the STS draft. When you just, if you could go back to the slide about STS report, I realized I had some comments there and I didn't express them. So there were a couple of things there, like the L equals parameter in DKIM. I mean, in most cases, I think the DKIM signing is going to happen on the way out by a completely separate set of software. So is there an attack that's envisioned by the use of the L attribute in this case that isn't normally the case for DKIM. I realize a lot of people aren't really happy about the L equals attribute, but I'm not sure that it's really necessary to express that requirement here in particular.
So we actually received feedback that people wanted that L attribute, although because of the existing attack on DKIM, where you own DKIM only verify up to the length, and the rest could be appended afterwards, which will basically mean that you cannot really trust the integrity of the report. So by having the no L attribute, the entire message body is protected and signed by the
And we actually think somebody's going to exploit that for.
We just want by the default to be safe.
I don't know. I guess it is. It's probably a safe thing to do. It may be operationally challenging for some players. I'm not sure that many people are using L equals anyway, but it may be. I think of it as a little bit of a layering violation in that L equals is in that the DKIM signature is something that just kind of gets stuffed on it on the way out. So I don't know. Just a comment about that. The other thing is, and I've got to go back and look at my notes, and I'll send an email with more detailed comments. But I'm a little bit concerned about the use of email as a transport mechanism when since there may be some sensitive information in terms of traffic information that's included in these reports. I mean, one old example that I was given was that, and this was an ISP speaking years and years ago, saying, we have to be really careful about the statistics of domain A talking with domain B because it may all of a sudden ramp up in advance of a merger or something like that that has a financial impact. So there is some sensitivity to the amount of traffic that flows between domains. And so I'm wondering if there's maybe something you should either point that out and tell people to think about, do you really want to use email as a transport mechanism as opposed to using an HTTPS sort of transport mechanism, and whether they want to make sure that they're using TLS for that.
I think that the report already fairly aggregated. The type of information will be which endpoint you failed to connect to. So if you had errors, you may have the specific IP of the endpoint MX you connected to. But you also have overall aggregate that will give you a number of total traffic. But yeah, you potentially anybody, the risk could be someone listening on the wire. You'll actually be able to see all that traffic similarly.
Or somebody that that people should pay attention to the security of the email endpoint that they're sending this to. Also, just a general hygiene comment, because a lot of people probably don't think of these reports as being sensitive at all, but I think they can be.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's very sensitive. It's very sensible to add a cautionary note about this kind of, probably another security consideration, just a few sentences.
Thanks.
All right. Anyone else? And I'm looking at Meet Echo, and nobody from Meet Echo seems to be stepping up to the mic. So I want to ask Alexei, do you think we need a second working group clause call for this, or are we good to go? I'm leaning towards good to go because the changes weren't really that substantive.
I'm happy to trust the chair on this.
Yeah. So let's put it this way: if somebody in the room, feels very strongly that we should do a second working group clause call, speak up. Otherwise, I'm just going to push the button on this.
Well, yeah, the other thing you can do is you can just last call or send a message saying, these are the changes that resulted from last call. Make sure that you're happy with this.
And I've sort of already sent that message to the list saying I expect to push the button on these on this version, right? And there may be final nits like the one you just sort of suggested.
Sure.
And we're going to definitely have a -12 here because, there's always stuff is going to come up in ISG review anyway, right? So,
Most certainly,
Yeah.
yes. So,
right. So we can, you don't, I wouldn't bother with doing a separate revision. You sort of keep track of Alexei's suggestion. Even better, Alexei, if you can remember to add that as your comment in ISG review.
Okay.
Yeah. See, there's a use for that
Yeah.
thing, right?
Okay.
And that way we can just
But
sort of go with the current version.
sensible comments will always be dealt with.
Yeah,
As long
absolutely.
as we're not spinning wheels and not rediscussing the same issue.
Exactly. Absolutely right. So that's why I'm saying if somebody right now feels that no, we really need to have another working group last call because I'm unsure of stuff, say so, right? And we'll consider that. Otherwise, I'm happy to say time to go.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Not hearing another batch of questions. All right.
Sorry, excuse me if I'm late.
Go ahead.
I'm new to the group. Just a question on the report drafts. The report statistics are meant to be used by who?
Do you need the slides back up or what?
Just is it to be used by anti-abuse teams, by
So the report is meant to be used by the receiving domain admin that will be able to have like real information about what's happening. Some of it is going to be like operational. Let's say there's a report that some endpoint MX have expired SSL certificate, but to allow them to have immediate action on it. But to also bring awareness in case some of the traffic is actually being downgraded, someone attempt to downgrade traffic, which itself may act as a deterrence against people doing it.
Yeah, okay, so then I would really back up the comment about the sensitivity of those reports. They should be really protected. I'm pretty sure that, if you spend time in an anti-abuse team in an ISP or a telco or wherever, there will be information there that could be used for reasons that we don't know, right? So let's make sure that they are protected themselves, would be my recommendation.
So there's a difference between making sure that they're protecting and making a note in the specification saying, hey, you might have a problem here, take action as appropriate. And I think Alexei was suggesting the latter, right? So sort of having advice in the security consideration section saying, this sort of information may be something you want to protect.
Okay.
Would that be okay with you?
That's really the minimum. I don't know really how these teams are equipped correctly to do that, or will pay attention, or will be careful or not, but
Are you concerned for protecting traffic in transit or at rest after it being delivered?
I think both.
Well, the traffic information at rest is not our concern, right?
I understand that. I'm just from what I could observe on how these teams operate, I would be concerned by both. But in this particular case, I think it's a transit problem.
Right.
Okay. You can see also what DMARC is doing, because DMARC has the same type of aggregate and actually detailed report, but of rejection. So
okay.
There's already like a reporting happening today on the wire.
True. It's sensitive, I think. So.
Right. So
okay, guys, I'm new here, so I don't want
no,
to tell
these are sensible questions. It's great that we bring it up, right? I'm just trying to get at what do we do at the spec level, and there's been a proposal on the table to go and treat this as a security consideration section thing.
So
right?
perhaps let's.
And I'm wondering whether we're still in that area.
Yeah, perhaps. It's naive again because it's a long time I've not been here. It's 20 years that I've not been in IETF. Was there a long time ago on IMAP and so on. But what's the cost of putting it like mandatory?
Well, I mean, if you have basically, we're talking about an email-based transport. My understanding is that if we're saying you must always do TLS for your reports, then you may actually have to change some of the core protocol to ensure that, right? You have to say, for instance, hey, we can only transport these reports over HTTPS. Maybe that's not necessarily possible in all situations, right? Maybe it's all right, exactly, or say dependency on required TLS. It's more complicated.
Yeah, I have to give designing on the fly alert.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
let's
we
not-
can think theoretically about doing, as MIME encryption to the recipient if the public key is added, but I'm not sure how practical this is going to be. And but this is something we might want to consider an extension on, but just throwing this idea.
I was on the SMIME path of source as well. So.
Right.
Okay, thank you for.
I still think the appropriate response here is a requirement, security considerations text. Yeah, and I have Alexei agreeing to remember to add that to his hopefully approve with comment in the ISG. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. All right. Jim, you're about to be up. There we are. Take it away.
Thanks. So I'm Jim Fenton. I don't represent much of anybody except myself. So wanted to talk about require TLS yet again. So just for those, I'll try and go through this sort of fast for those of you who may not have been at the previous working group meetings where we talked about this. But the problem is that when you send an email message, you really, it's kind of like fire and forget. You really have no idea whether or not the message is going to be handled with TLS in transit or not. If you are somebody like a reporter that's in a foreign jurisdiction, or perhaps a dissident in some jurisdiction, you would want to send the message, and you would want your messages to be encrypted at least in transit. Perhaps end-to-end as well, but of course end-to-end doesn't protect the metadata. So you want your messages to be encrypted in transit, and if you're sending something that's sort of sensitive, you would ideally like to have a way to say, I want you to send this message with TLS or not at all. If you can't do it with TLS, then don't do it. And that's basically what the function of this is. Next slide. So the goal is to allow senders to specify when it's needed. Right now, it's fine-grained in the sense that it applies to a particular message. You don't do it on a full domain basis. You do it for the messages that you consider to be sensitive, or perhaps when you submit messages, you may decide that you, as an individual, want to submit all of your messages with the required TLS. You can do that. It depends on what the capabilities of your endpoints are and so forth. But in terms of the protocol, it's message by message. Right now, it's got some control over certificate verification, and we'll come back to that. One of the things that typically happens right now with email is even if you have start TLS negotiated, there's oftentimes the certificates are verified, but then that result is ignored other than perhaps making it into the log files. So if you have a certificate match failure or an expired certificate or something like that, the message will go anyway. And that's good from the standpoint of a passive observer. It's bad from the standpoint of a man-in-the-middle attack. And require TLS is MTA to MTA only. Okay, next slide. So the way that this is done is there's a new SMTP service extension called require TLS that gets negotiated. If that succeeds, then you can send a message using a require TLS option on the mail from. The logic is in more detail in the spec, but basically the idea is if you can't negotiate require TLS, meaning that the recipient, the SMTP server, is promising to, on its onward transmission, also honor require TLS, then then you fail. And if you can't negotiate TLS, if you can't negotiate the proper TLS characteristics on that first hop, you also fail. So the require TLS follows the message, and there's no policy component to this. It's something that's just comes along with the message. There isn't any discovery that's needed. Next. So new stuff. It was an individual draft for quite a while, and since the last IETF, it has become a working group draft. So hopefully, we've had rather thin review on it so far, and I'm hoping that people will kind of start to take it a little bit more as an action to do some review on this, because I would like to get broader feedback. I've gotten good feedback from a small number of people, but in order to come up with any sort of a consensus, and there's some design decisions that need to be made that I'll be getting into, I would really like to try and get a broader set of feedback. There's a tool called SWAX. I forget what it stands for. It's a testing tool for submitting SMTP messages. I'm working with the author of that in order to get require TLS support. I'm not sure if it'll be in the standard version or whether it'll be a fork of this, but the idea will be that if you want to do some testing with this, you can submit messages using SWAX. And we still, not new things, but we still have two implementations. One is an XM, an extension XM, and one is a proprietary SMTP server called MDaemon. Next. So here are some of the design decisions that I was talking about a minute ago. One of the comments that we had was that it would be nice to have a mode called require TLS equals no. Require TLS was focused on increasing the security of the SMTP transmission. But you can picture in a time when there are also policy mechanisms like MTA STS that we just talked about, that there may be times when there's a message that you explicitly don't care whether or not the message is sent using start TLS. This may be some sort of a high priority alert that isn't at all confidential. But this was, this is considered by some to be an additional utility for require TLS. So I have put that in the specification. A couple of cautions about that. One is that it's kind of fragile. If you're basically trying to deliver, you're trying to express the lack of start TLS, you probably also need to be able to consider the case where the require TLS, you also have to accept sending the message when require TLS isn't supported either, and that means that all of a sudden you're just going to lose that tag on the first hop or on that hop of the message. So if there's multiple hops, then this require TLS thing doesn't follow the message like it does in the positive direction. And it also makes the logic quite a bit more complicated. You have to negotiate require TLS earlier in order to, because there are situations where you might want to accept a require TLS equals no option without a start TLS option. Okay, second issue is the granularity, and I'm not talking about the granularity in terms of is it message by message, like I mentioned before, but this is the granularity of how much are you going to constrain about the TLS characteristics of the connection when you're negotiating it. Do you want to, for example, have an option where the perhaps you don't trust the certificate authorities because you're transmitting from a regime that controls its own CA, and you want to say, okay, I really want this only to be transmitted if you have certificates that you can deign verify. So that's one of the options that's there right now. You can also require DNSSEC for the MX lookup, and the reason of that, of course, is to make sure that the MX record isn't being spoofed and that the message isn't being shunted off to perhaps some kind of monitoring or other attacker. You could consider, and what we don't have in there currently is constraints on the crypto characteristics, whether or not you want to require a particular TLS version, particular ciphers. Do you want to require, well, anyhow, any of those things. You could conceivably do that in require TLS as well, getting to be a lot of options. I'm trying to figure out where we should draw the line here. Should we say anything about this, about the start TLS connection at all, or is any start TLS that you can verify using any kind of a certificate verification mechanism, is that okay? Or do you want to have, do you want to put in additional options essentially to try and make this more robust against more sophisticated attacks? So this is my last slide. It's basically we got, I think, some interesting technical issues here, some interesting design decisions to make. I'm hoping that people understand the value of require TLS, and I'm hoping that people will contribute comments about where they think we ought to go with some of these decisions. Thank you.
I'm going to Bron Gondwana, Fastmail, repeat what I said at Prague, and I still think it's totally valid. Require TLS no should be a header on the email message, not something at this level. It's enough different from everything else that it complexifies this standard. And as you said, it can still get lost along the way. An email header won't be lost. So the no case should be an email header. The yes case should totally be something that's added at SMTP.
Yeah, I had done the require TLS yes cases not as an email header. I didn't define a header field for this, basically because this is a transport characteristic, and I didn't want to have to define how the you went through looking for a particular email header and behaved differently in those cases. But I guess what you're saying then is, would you do this as an email header in the current draft, or would you make the require TLS equals no kind of a separate mechanism entirely?
I would probably take all the require TLS equals no stuff out of this draft and have a separate document describing I don't want to have all the TLS stuff apply to this message as a header.
Okay.
If you have both, then
yeah,
it gets rejected by any compliant server, right?
Well, I haven't done an implementation, but it certainly made the text of the draft more complicated when I had to describe the mechanisms for no as well as the yes cases.
I would say if a message with the header that says no arrives at a require TLS on it, then it should be rejected immediately by the receiving server with this message content is incompatible with require TLS.
Okay, thanks.
Nikolai Sikorski, Google. So similar, actually I had a similar comment about the header. The other element for me that's interesting is there any concern with actually leaking out what's happening inside during the email delivery? Like allowing someone to probe whether connection are encrypted by having the message being delivered up and then getting the bounce, which will let you know what's happening on the internally in the domain receiving messages.
I'm not sure I quite got all of the case that you were talking about, but one of the early comments that I received was that require TLS should only be negotiated on the hello that occurs after start TLS has been negotiated. So a passive attacker would not be able to observe the use of require TLS.
Sorry, so no, my question was more like about someone sending a message like this to a chain of relays and being able to discover, let's say, one of the mail server down the line is not supporting TLS and getting back the information.
Okay, I guess I don't think of that as being particularly sensitive. Most people can look, can just connect to a mail server directly and find that out.
That will be more the case inside the enterprise environment,
Mm-hmm.
where you have internal relaying in enterprise, and enterprise may not necessarily want this to be.
But anybody that has a message that has gone through that path typically can get that from the received headers as well.
The TLS information is just like you see whatever is in you can put whatever you want in there, regarding encryption or not.
Interesting comment. I'm not sure that I see the sensitivity of that to the same extent, but maybe I'm not seeing the same use cases that you are.
Okay, it will be more like leaking internal information from companies. That's my concern here.
Yeah.
I presume in that case you're referring to leaking to the sender, that something after it's gone into the internal systems of the recipient. Is that what you're talking about? I would have thought that in that case the recipient can ignore this once it's inside their internal network if they want to, and so not reject it as a possibility. Essentially, yeah. I would have, if that's what the concern to them, I would have thought that would be a valid thing to do. Sorry, Neil Jenkins, Fastmail. One point I just wanted to make when you were talking about all the different options that considering of how much do you want to be able to specify of what's required, I think it would be good if it aligned with what the MTA STS can specify as required. For implementation will then simply be looking at that and this to decide is it required, but then basically using the same code all the way through. I think having those out of alignment is just doesn't seem worth it. It'd be nice if they're the
Well,
same.
there is some reason for a difference in alignment. Actually, when it started out, I did this kind of independently of MTA STS, and I forget the Dane and Chain for the two options on mine, and MTA STS had similar names. But the way it's shaken out, MTA STS doesn't consider Dane because Dane is its own mechanism. Whereas since this is not a policy mechanism, you would like to be able to express perhaps Dane verification or 509 certificate chain verification, and that's something that doesn't apply to STS.
Ron Gondwana, I just wanted to comment on that breach of contract thing. Inside enterprises, often things get transferred over transports that aren't even SMTP.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't matter because it will be converted back to SMTP with the contract agreement as it leaves the organization. I mean, even within Postfix, for example, which we use, a file gets saved to disk and then another process processes it, and another process, and finally the SMTP sender processes it. Clearly, we're not actually using SMTP between those stages. So there will certainly be intermediate stages that are processing a message that aren't doing it via SMTP. I wouldn't call that a breach of contract necessarily. And the enterprise gets to decide what the response back says about where they decided they couldn't do it. If you agree to the contract on the way in, then you either reject saying I couldn't agree to it on the way out, or you agree to it on the way out. What happens in the middle doesn't matter.
Yeah, I expect that within enterprises and within a given email operator, there will be exceptions to this, both by cases where SMTP is not used, and maybe some cases where it is used, but it's used, inside of a VPN or something like that. And so there isn't really the monitoring concern anyway. I'm really concerned about the external, like interdomain cases of monitoring.
My concern is still in the case, like if there's no guarantee, what is the value for the sender? Like the sender is putting like a requirement. If there's no guarantee that it will be fulfilled, that at some point some host in the middle, it goes to an enterprise gateway, you start to remove it, and then it's going to be forwarded outside the domain without any encryption. Like how do we?
We don't have any guarantees that the message is even going to be delivered, or there is no guarantee that a given MX host that I'm sending a message to isn't going to send a copy of the message to Fort Meade. So, yeah, there are no guarantees in this business. What we expect is, we'll define what it takes in order to be compliant, and when you're sending a message, you're already depending on the good behavior of the MX hosts that you're sending to.
Yeah, I would just like some firm direction one way or the other. Are we asking actually, is that header supposed that extension supposed to mean that I expect everybody to get to protect the message all the way to the end, or it's like kind of best effort, you're going to protect it, but if you have some enterprise, you can choose on your own to stop protecting it, and I won't complain about it.
Well, what the idea is that if you advertise that you support require TLS, you're basically making a promise to the sender that you are going to honor that.
Okay.
So Arnaud Tadei, Symantec. So if I understand correctly, and again, I'm new, so bear with me if I'm very naive, but so you are going to create an extension, a service extension, so that the chain on which I'm going to transport my email is going to guarantee me TLS, right?
Yes.
And so one of the use cases you have in mind is, for example, protect, I don't know, journalists in some specific countries that could be intercepted by bad guys. But so when you do that, right, the TLS terminates at one MTA and starts to the other one, right? And to be honest, if you see our legal interception, which actually is a good case, and not to compare with mass surveillance or other things, but if you just see how legal interception is done, I mean, you can intercept anyway, even if you have TLS there. So I don't really see how you would really protect the use case of these people who ought to be protected, even with required TLS, because it will be done anyway.
Well, we're not protecting everybody against everybody. We're protecting the senders against people other than the operators of the MTAs in the path. Of course, when we're using TLS, it's hop by hop, and the message is in the clear at each of the MTAs. And so there is there's an intercept opportunity there. And we're not, I mean, if you want to deal with that, then you do end-to-end encryption, and this is not a substitute for end-to-end encryption. This is a supplement to it that gives you better protection on the wire against people other than the MTAs that you're intending to send the message through.
Yeah, so I hear that, but I really don't see how you can do that, to be honest. If you know how legal interception is done and other things, you will see that if you are on the MTA side, and if you are in an operator, and you must comply because you have no other choice, otherwise you lose your license in country, you will have to do certain things in the MTA to get some information passed to a third party. Right?
Yes.
So that's if you are correctly organized in a country that is doing it cleanly, blah, 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 we are okay. But for countries that do not do cleanly, they will still impose to these operators in the middle to do that anyway. And there is nothing that prevents you to do that. I don't see, I mean, there is a big fraction between, I understand you want to create some kind of respectful trust on the chain. And I like that. I like the intention, right? Let me be correct on that. I like the intention. But the problem is that you are on a side where you want to be explicit. That's good. But on the other side, the attacking party, and you don't know who they are, they will anyway do something here that must be undetectable by nature, whether this is legal or not, right? So you are going to put yourself in a place where you will believe that you are giving the service which requires TLS and the people are protected. But in truth, you can't promise that. You have no guarantee that this is going to happen. I'm sure I'm clear on that.
Okay.
Or,
Well, the common case here is there are certain regimes, certain countries in particular, that do downgrade attacks on SMTP connections. If you try to negotiate start TLS, there's a middle box that interferes with that negotiation in such a way that start TLS is not negotiated. So
I see.
in this case, require TLS, if it detects that it can't negotiate TLS, it doesn't send the message. And the sender of the message finds that out. That's really the use case that, or the type of attack that we're dealing with is these downgrade attacks on SMTP.
Okay, so now I understand better. Thank you. It's only one part of the use cases you protect, but you can't protect the other part.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, the MTAs that you're dealing with may be in completely different regimes from the ones that are attempting the attack, and so essentially you're denying the regimes other than the places that legal intercept is legal from passively or by downgrade attack monitoring your traffic.
Okay, thank you.
Daniel Kahn-Gilmore from the ACLU. So I think this draft is great. I'm happy to see this going forward. And just in response to the last question, just wanted to say, like, not every draft can fix every problem. So this draft fixes a set of problems. I think it's well scoped. I think it's reasonable. Not everyone's going to use it, but the people who do use it know what they're getting themselves into. So I don't think it needs to solve all the other problems that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Neil Jenkins. Yeah, I agree. Like, I think it's important to say this is not, if you're a journalist in some particular regimes, you probably shouldn't be using email regardless of which of these extensions there are. There are more secure methods you should be using. But this is a nice way of increasing the chance of having encrypted connections wherever possible to secure that you're reducing the amount of places you have to trust. It's just your MTA and the recipient's MTA, basically, and enforcing the chain along the way. And that seems like a good thing.
Yeah, Ron Gondwana, I was basically going to say exactly the same thing, and that it's your MTA saying, I will apply these protections or require these protections on what I send on. That's all this is saying, is you're saying, I've been asked to do this, and I'm going to make sure it happens or reject the message.
Right.
That's all it is, and it's a good solution to that problem.
Thank you.
So I want to, since we have time, I wouldn't mind spending a little bit more time on the required TLS equals no thing, because I was looking back in the notes, and this was actually not discussed last time. Well, you made that point, right? But other than that, I don't see that we don't have clear consensus either way here, right? And it would be great if we could spend the face-to-face time here to see if we can get closer to consensus on what we do with that.
Neil Jenkins' comment on that. I find that one kind of odd. So obviously you can just not include this require TLS for the SMTP thing. So this is only to override MTA STS
and possibly Dane, yeah.
Yeah, and if the recipient's advertising MTA STS, unless there's a really active attack happening, there really should be no situation where you can't establish a TLS connection to them. I'm struggling to see really why you need this at all.
Other opinions? I mean, so far there doesn't seem to be a lot of support for required TLS equals no. But
You're saying you don't know why we need required TLS equals no, or you're saying we don't know why we need required TLS? Okay.
yeah, and Jim, I heard you say that you had actually gotten a lot of sort of requests for that feature. So,
Well, not a lot of requests. One request in particular.
right. So maybe we're on a little bit on shaky grounds, actually including this.
Yeah, I put it in somewhat speculatively in order to see what the spec looked like or what it did to the
Yeah,
spec, but
Right.
I mean,
But that
it's
should really be working group
removable again.
consensus.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, since it was an individual draft at that point, I guess I felt free to fiddle
yes,
with it
okay.
any way I wanted.
It was, you're right.
Bron Gondwana, since it was my suggestion in the first place,
Oh, man.
what I would suggest is, yeah, pull it out completely. It could be a completely separate spec that adds a header that says, please ignore all these things. It doesn't need to be part of this spec at all. It would simplify the spec a lot not to have it. And then if someone specifically wants it, then they're probably the right person to drive that separate specification.
I mean, I think we'll take this to the list, but it sounds like we're sort of leaning towards dropping this. Yeah. All right. So, Jim, how much? What do you need? You need reviews, but how much time do you need? Are we gonna be? Can we be done by London?
I think we potentially can. It's a fairly straightforward spec. I mean, the real question is, I'm still looking for some ideas about, and maybe people want to go off and look at the spec and see what they think. But I mean, the question still remains of how specific do we want to be about the way that the TLS request, the type of TLS connection that's negotiated, where how you verified your certificates and all of that sort of thing. Realizing that for implementers, some of these things are going to be tricky. I mean, we've got in there. There's an option right now that you can say, I require that the MX record lookup be done using DNSSEC. Question is, do we want that? Because for an implementer of an MTA, I think that may be a challenging thing for them to do. I mean, it requires that they do something special in their MX record lookup in order to make sure that they've gotten a DNSSEC verification on that. And the same thing goes with whether you're going to require DANE verification on certificates, or whether you can just use some library that says, tell me if this is a good certificate or not.
Neil Jenkins, I think something to point out there, in the email space in general, there's not been particular enthusiasm for DANE and DNSSEC, and not a lot of widespread adoption outside of a few more niche providers, whereas the MTA STS stuff is already widely deployed. And again, I just want to reinforce my point, if it kind of only does the options that are in there, it's more likely to get widespread adoption more quickly.
Yeah. And, I could picture that there would be, if later on we wanted to do something that was more specific, DANE versus, a requirement, say, to do DANE specifically, maybe that's an extension that happens afterwards. I don't know. Have to think about how that would work, but.
So before, excuse me, before you get to sit down, I want to actually peg some people to go and do a review of this, or actually possibly of the next version where you've simplified stuff by putting out required TLS equals no. So Daniel, can I put you on the spot for a? Yeah, that Daniel. Yeah. To actually go and review and post a review to the mailing list saying the usual stuff, right? And maybe a couple of more people. Can I get some volunteers? All right. Wendy, if you're taking notes, can you just take down names of people who have volunteered? Because I'm actually going to go follow up on this and make sure that we get some. Because last stage of this document, we want to make sure that we've gotten enough review to be able to tell the ISG that yes, we do have support for this. The working group has considered it carefully, and it is good to go. And sort of looking towards London, I want to be in that place. Any other sort of volunteers for looking at doing a review? Okay, excellent. So can you just state your name for? Yeah. If you caught that, Wendy, we can. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. All right, and can you just also state your name for? Or not? Thank you. All right, that's a good size, good number of reviewers for this draft, and I think we can be comfortable after that if it looks like we have consensus.
And if anybody else has implementations that they want to try out, please just contact me separately. I'm in touch with the other implementers, and I want to try and get a little bit of interoperability testing done here as well.
That'd be great. So maybe that could be sort of a report out in London.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. If there's nothing else, we can go to open mic. And
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jim. Like consider leaving that up because it's always a always good advice. More reviews, please. All right. Do you want to? Yes. Do you want to do a quick summary of ISG status? That'd be great.
Right. So this went to ISG evaluation. There are no pending discussions on the document. I think all comments were addressed. There is one issue raised about SNI, use of TLS SNI with this, and I need to follow up, but I think I agree with Keith and Chris saying that basically we don't have much experience with using this with email, so we probably shouldn't try to design it in a hurry. So
right.
That basically Eka raised an issue that this is underspecified at the moment, and I don't think we don't have much experience at the moment. So
right.
So I'm tempted to approve the document this week, possibly, and then it will go to RFC editor's queue.
Right. That sort of leaves us again saying what we've been saying for a couple of meetings now, that we are sort of nearing the end of our pipeline.
Yep.
We don't have, as far as the chair and chairs know, there is nobody sort of lining up with other work. There's nobody telling us they want to do UTA for XMPP or NTP or something, which means that we're about to say bye-bye.
Now that you mentioned it, yeah.
No, yeah. Thank you very much. Which means that our, the plan here looks like, sometime around London, after London, we'll actually be closing down.
Yeah, unless something new and interesting that gets everybody excited.
But then,
we are probably going to close around.
It would have to be pretty exciting, and you would have to be pretty quick about it. Let's put it that way. So if you are now thinking maybe at some point, so this is the point. All right. And with that, unless somebody has other stuff they want to bring up, looks like you get half an hour back on your schedule. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. And maybe we'll see each other in London. Maybe not. We'll see. Both of them. Both of them go. I'll do a write-up of both of them. And no, there are no more comments. I mean, on any of them, as far as I can see now. This discussion on. Oh, by the way, if you haven't signed the blue sheet, come and do that. So there are no new comments. The stuff that Alexia and Arno brought up, that can be handled in IEC review and whatever.